Hello and welcome to the video. Today we have a short story titled The Hanged Men Gang Part 3. I hope you enjoy. The night was cool and an ominous fog had descended over the quiet township of Frostvale. The party had silently followed the road leading out of town, trying to copy the sneaking movements of their thief as best as possible. Crouched low, Artair raised a hand, signaling for the party to halt. "This is where the trail leads off the road," Artair whispered as he looked back at the group. Taran thought himself a decent hunter, and he had trailed bands of fleeing soldiers from the battlefield many times, but without the guidance of Artair, he would have never guessed that there was another path leading off toward the west. "You sure this is the way? Doesn't look travelled enough to me. Do you think it was a bad idea not to bring that enormous dog of hers?" Taran said, creeping his way to the front of the group. He peered into a thicket of densely packed oak trees as they passed by. "We don't need that hound announcing our presence to every living thing in this forest," Nessa hissed, crouching beside him. Balanos bent forward and studied a patch of grass that, at least to Taran, looked the same as every other patch of grass. "I do see tracks, but they're faint. My guess is that these bandits don't use the easiest paths, if you get my meaning," the oldest in the group said, seeming to have sobered up at least a little. "It's another 100 meters or so to the cottage. I saw the bandits take the bundle into the barn, but it seemed like many more ruffians were in the house. What should we do?" Artair said as the group huddled together. "I reckon we cause a distraction out front of the cottage, draw 'em out, then ambush 'em," Taran said with conviction. "And the four of us are going to be able to defeat an unknown number of savage bandits, are we?" Nessa said. "If it were up to me, I'd have our sneaky little friend over here see if he can't get into the barn unnoticed. Then, once we are sure the princess is safe, we spring a trap on them," Balanos suggested. "Well, I think both of those plans are going to get us all killed. Besides, we still aren't sure that the bundle was, in fact, the princess," Nessa said, her voice rising. "Shh. When it comes to a fight, you're quite timid for one who snaps her mouth every chance she gets," Taran replied, giving the druidess a comical glance. Before she could retort, Artair cut in. "Balanos is right. We need to get in there and save whoever it is in that barn, before we decide on anything else." Taran thought the kid had the right idea, but if any of them made a sound and the Hanged Men gang came out before a trap could be set, then they would all be in serious trouble. Not hearing a rebuttal, Artair turned and continued on into the dense trees. This wasn't going to be easy, Artair thought, as the group came to the edge of the trees, the cottage in sight. There was light flickering through the small windows of the house, and the sound of many unintelligible male voices could be heard. First, he would need to find a way into the barn. He hoped there wasn't a guard posted. Then, he had to get out of there with the hopefully quiet prisoner. "Look, just in case things go badly," Artair started, before he was interrupted by Nessa. "Just in case they come out. Yeah, we get it, young one. No need to be testy with the lad," Taran said, turning to Artair. "Listen, off you go. Try and find a quiet way into the barn. We'll set up here and get ourselves ready." With a curt nod to the group, Artair was off. He padded across the empty space in front of the cottage, reaching the front of the barn quickly. The large barn door wasn't even locked. The board across the door seemed to be the only hindrance to would-be escaped prisoners. Deciding that this access point would make too much noise anyway, he made his way around to the side of the barn which faced away from the cottage. There he found a loading portal up on the second story, which was wide open. Thinking that these bandits were awfully careless, he unwound his grappling hook. With a flick of his wrist, the hook was firmly attached to the mechanism that was used to transport hay up into the loft. In a few short minutes, Artair was inside the barn. Peering over the inside edge of the loft, he saw what looked like the bundle of sheets he had seen earlier that evening, only this time they were rolling this way and that. Artair hung his head down far enough that he could see the entire room and searched for a sign of a guard. Not seeing any, he deftly jumped down onto the barn floor. The sound of his footfall hadn't seemed to be noticed by the writhing bundle of sheets. He padded over and placed a hand over where he assumed a mouth would be. "Shh, it's Arter. I'm here to rescue you, but you have to keep silent, otherwise the gang will hear us. Nod your head if you understand," Arter whispered, as the sheets slowly nodded. It took him a few moments to untangle the mess and reveal Princess Thalia. She was gagged and her arms were tied behind her back. He quickly removed the rope that was tied around her mouth. "Thank you, by the gods, Arter. They came into our room and had their hands over my mouth before I had time to scream," Thalia said quietly, utter panic in her voice. "Don't worry, the others are outside and—" Before Arter could finish his sentence, there came a crashing sound from outside, as if wooden panels were being smashed to splinters. Balanos scrambled for purchase on the soil outside the cottage, trying hard to roll himself over. Both Nessa and Taryn had chosen an advantageous position, her behind a tree and him behind the woodpile, and Balanos thought he'd better do the same. So he had attempted to climb onto a cart, piled high with hay. He had barely begun to climb the side of the cart, using the slats on the side as a ladder, when they had shattered under his weight. A cacophony of breaking timber and grunts from the old archer had broken the silence as he hit the ground. Everything seemed to stop for a heartbeat, and the mix of voices from inside the cottage were absent. "Oh, gods," Balanos wheezed as he rolled onto his front and into a crouching position behind the cart. The front door of the cottage burst open. 5 burly men walked out and arrayed themselves on the cottage's porch. "Who thinks they can interrupt our game of cards, huh?" The biggest and meanest looking of the thugs bellowed in a gruff voice. "I reckon we ought to teach 'em a lesson, says I." A gangly bandit to the right of the first man sneered. Slowly, confidently, the cronies drew their weapons as they stomped down the front steps. "You're gonna wish you'd never been born by sunrise," the bandit leader said as he opened his arms in a gesture of invitation. "You see, we nabbed ourselves a princess. She's worth something," he shouted as the men formed a semicircle around him. "Whoever yous are, you ain't worth squat to us. So the way I sees it, we can do this the easy way, or the fun way." "Oh, I do like the fun way, Dom," the gangly one said, seeming to writhe with pleasure. "I prefer the torture myself. There's always something satisfying about seeing their faces at the end," the fattest of the bandits said. It was now or never. Balanos, bow drawn, leaned around the side of the cart and let fly with an arrow. It struck the lead bandit square in the chest and he staggered, plucking the arrow from his seemingly undamaged armor as he let out a bark of a laugh. Without warning, Taryn charged in from behind the pack, sword and shield glinting in the moonlight. His footsteps gave him away and the gangly bandit sidestepped his thrust with ease. Pivoting on the spot, Taryn held up his shield as a blow from the bandit's long knives jabbed in. Using the momentum from his turn, Taryn swung out and met the sword of another bandit. Stepping back to create space, shield raised, Taryn could see he had the attention of 3 of the 5 bandits. Charging forward, he lunged at the one in the middle, then swung out to his left with his shield and struck the gangly bandit in the face, hard enough to hear the bones in his nose break. Without hesitating, Taryn used the bandit's temporary pause of pain to deliver an overhead strike, but the bandit wasn't green, and through his pain he saw the swing coming, and sidestepped again. Not allowing himself to be surrounded, Taryn began to circle, keeping the 3 bandits he had engaged so far within his eyesight. Feinting a blow towards the middle thug again, Taryn stopped mid-maneuver as an arrow whizzed between himself and the bandit leader. The man had stepped backwards to avoid Taryn's feint and narrowly missed being struck in the back of the head with an arrow. "Tem, over there. They have themselves a cowardly archer. Deal with it," the lead thug shouted. The bandit to the left of the leader, who sported a long beard, held up his shield and advanced on the cart, which Balanos was using as cover. Hearing the footsteps, Balanos nocked another arrow, this time rounding the cart on the other side. Just as the bandit approached the wagon, Balanos walked out into the open, catching the man off guard. The arrow passed through the bandit's neck and continued on, out of sight. Not pausing, Balanos knocked and shot another arrow towards the group harassing Taran. Again, the arrow zipped through the mob without finding its target. Balanos was trying his hardest not to hit Taran, and the men were all dancing around as they fought, making it difficult to aim. After parrying a blow from the gangly man, Taran returned the favour with a strike of his own and sliced the bandit in the ribs. Taran's razor-sharp sword made swift work of the man's leather armour, and blood sprayed out, following the arc of the sword point. This only seemed to enrage the bandit, who charged, screaming at Taran. His first blow was deflected by Taran's shield, but the knife in his other hand snagged the mercenary in the ribs. Taran didn't pay attention to the injury. The adrenaline pumping through his body was enough that he barely faltered. A fraction of a second too late, thick vines shot out of the ground, wrapping themselves around the gangly bandit's outstretched arms. Taran deflected an incoming blow from one of the other thugs, then he seized the opportunity to cleave both the gangly man's arms off below the elbow. The bandit howled. Now free of the vine's grasp, he toppled backwards, stumps raised in the air. Nessa came running out from behind a tree, arms raised. More vines shot out from near Taran's legs, right into the chest of the bandit who was now putting the most pressure on him. The vine hit the bandit in the chest and he staggered, but this also prevented Taran's swing, causing him to pause and break rhythm. Seizing on the opportunity, the largest bandit struck with a heavy axe blow, smashing Taran's shield into his own face. Blood gushed from his shattered nose. "Sorry!" Nessa shouted, as she wrapped a vine around the leading bandit's massive leg. Rooted to the spot, the burly man snarled at Nessa, as an arrow glanced off his heavily armoured shoulder. Bellowing like a beast, he ripped the vine from his leg with one mighty tug of his bear-like hand. The lead bandit drew a large warhammer from behind his back and charged at Taran. Dancing to the side of a blow from one of his opponents, Taran manoeuvred right into the charging beast. The leader's hip and shoulder caught Taran with so much force that he was lifted off his feet and thrown onto his back, losing his shield. The two remaining lackeys rounded on Nessa, coming at her from the left and right. She slowly backed away, arms raised. The fat bandit to her right darted in first. She wrapped a vine around his neck from behind, which yanked him backwards off his feet. The other was now within range, swinging his sword and smiling devilishly. It was all Nessa could do to raise a vine to deflect his blow. But it came too late. The sword cut into the meat of her left arm. The blow wasn't deep, but she could feel warm blood running down her sleeve, and she began to lose feeling in her fingers. Nessa turned and ran, jumping over the armless, screaming man toward Balanos. Looking up, she began to shout a warning as the bearded bandit whose neck had been pierced with an arrow crawled up behind Balanos. He jammed a short knife into Balanos's thigh from behind, and the old archer screamed. The brute of a leader spun, hearing the commotion from behind, which gave Taran the needed time to roll over to his shield and get up. Turning back to Taran, the leader smiled as he said, "Did you really think you could take out the Hanged Men gang with 3 people? Fools! I'll make sure you regret that decision." He swung the great hammer over his head and brought it down. Taran jumped to the side and lunged in with his sword, only to receive a heavy backhand that moved so quickly he didn't even register it. The force of the strike spun him and he fell again, his reflexes slowing as blood ran profusely from his abdomen. This time, the leader stomped on Taran's leg, and the mercenary shrieked with pain. Balanos turned towards the bandit at his feet and jabbed an arrowhead into the man's eye, hoping to finish him off once and for all. Wincing, he dropped to one knee and watched as Nessa ran over to him. He drew another arrow, nocked it, and waited for Nessa to get out of the way. She never got the chance. The bandit with the sword caught up with her and tripped her from behind. Tumbling into Balanos, they both went sprawling. Finally free of the vine around his neck, the largest bandit marched over to join his comrade, who was now bearing down on Nessa and Balanos. Nessa stretched out her arm in an attempt to summon more vines, but the closest bandit grabbed her wrist and slammed the pommel of his sword onto the ridge of her hand. Nessa screamed and recoiled her arm, while the other bandit kicked Balanos's bow away and placed an axe head on the nape of his neck. The bandit leader stomped on Taran's shield, crushing his arm underneath it. Taran yelled in pain again and tried to roll away. Before he could, the bandit leader lifted him up by his armor's collar, swatted his sword out of his grasp, and proceeded to backhand him again. "You lot have cost me 2 good boys. It's not often I find degenerates like these, you know," the leader said as the other 2 thugs chuckled. He walked towards them, Taran choking as the bandit held him roughly. "'Cause of what you've done, we're gonna have ourselves a little party, once we're done with you. Always good to let off a little steam after a scrap," he said, laughing as he hit Taran again. Out of nowhere, a grappling hook struck the fat bandit in the side of the head. Bringing his hand up to his now bleeding face, the bandit turned towards where it had come from, growled, and stomped over in that direction. "Have we got another mouse hiding in the dark?" the fat thug said. As he reached the barn, a pile of sheets fell onto his head from above, blinding him. Before he could escape, a hand dropped onto his head, holding it steady while a dagger slit the man's throat. The others watched as the entangled thug stumbled out of the shadows, a torrent of blood staining the sheet dark red. The thug swayed as he took another step, then fell with a thud to the ground. Suddenly, the grappling hook flew out of nowhere once again, this time towards the snarling leader. But the brute wasn't born yesterday. He caught the end of the grappling hook with the hand that usually held his hammer and yanked Arter out of the shadows and onto his face. "Go finish that one off. He's made me mad," the leader said to his last remaining lackey, who turned towards Arter, sword raised. Just as the bandit brought his sword down, he became frozen in place. Unable to cry out, the man just stood there, mid-swing. "What are you waiting for, idiot?" said the bandit leader, who half turned to face the odd sight. With his last bit of energy, Taran took advantage of the distraction and tugged free the knife at the side of his belt, before plunging it into the exposed armpit of the leader, who dropped him roughly. Roaring, the leader punched Taran so hard in the face that it knocked him out completely. The leader turned towards Nessa and Balanos, enraged, and charged over to them. In 2 strides he was on them. He slapped Nessa so hard in the face, she fell face first into the dirt and didn't move again. With his left arm, he bent down and grabbed Balanos by the throat and lifted him off his feet. Gasping for his life, Balanos attempted to punch the bandit, to no effect. Balanos's arms stopped obeying his commands, and his vision grew dark. Suddenly, the bandit leader jerked backwards and fell as if gravity had somehow doubled, dropping Balanos. Arter had snuck up and under Balanos, plunging his dagger up and under the chin of the brute's face. Balanos caught his breath, then looked down at the leader, who twitched as his muscles tensed for the last time. Arter turned to look to where Thalia had been hiding as she approached shakily, holding a pitchfork. "Quickly, help me with the others," Arter shouted as he ran over to see to Taran. Before he got to him, he heard a high-pitched scream and turned his head just in time to see the bandit with the sword unfreeze and sprint towards Thalia. Before Arter could even turn around, the man had stopped running, arms limp at his sides. With an effort, Thalia pushed the man backwards, the pitchfork tines cutting clear through his ribs. Both bandit and princess fell to the ground. "Are you all right, princess?" Arter called as he turned back to Taran. I think so," Thalia stammered, getting to her feet. She looked like she was about to be sick. It took the rest of the night and most of the next day for Nessa, with the help of Thalia and Arter, to stabilize the 2 other members of their crew. The use of certain roots and weeds had staunched the blood from anyone whose wounds were significant enough, but the group knew they would need further aid down the line to avoid infections and to ensure their wounds healed correctly. For now, they were mobile enough. The travel back into Frostvale took a lot longer than it had taken them to leave, with Taran being supported by Thalia and Balanos by Arter. By the time the battered group had reached the town, all the common people had gathered. Is it over?" the blacksmith asked from the front of the gathering. "Farmer Kenner said he heard a fight at the old cottage, loud enough to wake his entire family." The group stopped, and Thalia, passing Balanos over to Nessa, approached the mob. "The bandit group called the Hanged Men has been brought to justice," she said, as the townsfolk murmured and looked at one another. "And what proof do you have that this deed is done?" the blacksmith questioned. Thalia turned towards Taran, who took from his back the warhammer of the bandit leader. "Here is your proof. Let it be known that King Ventus doesn't care for his people, but we do. We are," Thalia paused before she said, "we are the bringers of peace in these troublesome times. Where your king falls short, we will be here to pick up the pieces. One day, Arundel will be free of this incompetent ruler who has given up on his subjects." The crowd cheered and whooped. "What are we to call you, miss?" the blacksmith asked. Turning back to face the bloodied group, Thalia smiled. Then she shouted to the crowd, "We are the Misfits of Arundel." The end. That was The Hanged Men Gang Part 3. It is the third episode of the season. If you have missed any of the previous episodes, consider going back and checking them out. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment any feedback you have, and consider subscribing as there will be more tales to come. This was a Tello Tale. Thanks for watching.